Oh, what? Again?
You all good, bro?
Yeah, my phone just died. It keeps doing this.
Oh, man, that sucks. I've got 90% on mine. You should probably charge your phone more often.
Right. Well, I charged it overnight, and it's 10 a.m.
Yeah,
so...
I've got 90% on mine.
I know, you said that already.
Oh, my God. Walt, your phone is dead.
Am I awake right now?
My phone is so amazing. I charged it yesterday. Been using it all morning. You're not going to believe this, actually. Walt, it's on...
I know, it's on 90%!
Before we recorded this skit forever, I specifically said to Walt, this sounds like something we've said in real life.
I would believe it. I would believe
Honestly,
it.
yeah, me too.
Welcome to the Get Commanded podcast by the Greensboro Commander community. It's the GCP by the GCC, helping you to have better games of Commander. I am your host, Walt.
Hello, Commander players. It's your other host, James.
Well, we were talking about POWAH. So I wonder if the Space Commanders have...
I mean, I haven't received any text from them.
I haven't either.
I've just now stopped answering because of all the weird stuff that happens.
The lights coming off.
Yeah,
it was something.
But I did see the email in our inbox, and It's got the audio file. So
it does. Let's give it a crack. So it's an incoming transmission. It's from the deep depths of the galaxy, from the Space Commanders. It's time to get commanded. Consider the best method for defining your power level.
Oh, I'm not sure if you can see this. Before we got to the audio file, did you see that this is a fan-requested episode?
Oh, so are they in touch with our fans now, the Space Commanders?
If you guys are talking to the Space Commanders, can you tell them that we'd
Stop. Tell them to stop.
Well, we'd like the key to our cell to get out.
We'd like to leave the room.
I'm really keen for this because we have actually talked about this once before. I'm not sure if you remember this. It's a while ago now, but on episode 2, we had a bit of a conversation about Rule 0.
Oh, we did.
And obviously Rule 0 kind of talks about power level naturally.
Yeah. I think actually I was looking back at, because I also remembered that we talked about this. And I was looking back at that episode and around this time, I don't know if you remember, I was writing little sort of suggestions of how long we should talk about everything, and I distinctly remember this chunk of the Rule 0 one, I'd written 20 minutes. I was like, that's a good amount of time. I think it ended up being closer to 30 or 35 because it's a huge thing, right?
So strap in for a 3-hour extravaganza, everybody, on power levels.
God, I hope not. After is our longest. I think it's still the responding one, right?
That was the one that
2 hours.
the one that I was very passionate about and wrote so many card examples and just got very obsessed with it.
Yes, well, we'll do our best to not make it that long. But look, it's a really important chunk of what's going to affect how our game of Commander is going to go, right?
Yeah,
it's literally laying the groundwork for what kind of match we want to have.
It's the first question someone will ask in a Rule 0 conversation. If you say, I want to play this deck, they're like, what power level is it?
Yeah.
It's usually the first question someone will ask.
Yeah.
It's probably also one of the it's getting harder and harder to answer that question honestly and accurately.
I'd agree. And I think we should start right off the bat with... I will say we don't see this a lot in our store, but online this is extremely prevalent, which is the number scale, right? You give it a score out of 10. You sort of look at your deck and you go, yep, I reckon my deck is a 6. And then someone sort of tries to base it around roughly what that number is.
The funny thing is, though, I am not a big fan of this, this number system, because... it doesn't say, because we've talked about how complicated the Commander format is and how many nuances there are to it. Do you really think you can sum up a deck in a number?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think, yeah. Look, the main problem we run into, to be honest, I don't know if you've seen this before, but pretty much every deck ends up being a 7.
Yeah, it's good, but it's not really good. But it's good. Like, it's that everyone... It's this weird thing of, like, I want to be really modest about my deck, but also I don't want to undersell it, but I don't want to oversell it. So 7 is a good ground. Yeah. There's also, weirdly, I'm not sure if you've seen this before, but if you ask someone to pick a number in their head between 1 and 10, the likeliness of them picking 3 or 7 is above 50%.
Yeah, I think I've heard this before. It's like kind of like a zero magic involved magic trick. Just ask them to pick a number and 7. Then go, was it 7? And they go, oh my God.
How did you know that? Statistics, baby.
So look, you'll see that a lot online, right? People trying to pick their number. But I want to kind of give an example of how we go wrong with these numbers, right? And why we end up at everything being a 7. So let's say that I am new to Commander, right? I've bought a precon. let's say I've maybe swapped in 5 cards, right? I've taken out 5 of those like super high
Command Zone episode.
Yeah. And I didn't buy all the cards, but I sort of looked at 5 of them and went, yeah, I can afford that. I swapped those in. I always have like stacks of fun when I play it. It's definitely better than it was when it was a pre-con. And I think, it's not bad. It's not amazing. It's probably roughly a 7.
But it's a well-made deck because it started as a precon, so it's got the right amount of ramp, it's got the right amount of removal, it's got all the necessities of a commander deck. You've upgraded it a bit, so it's above that 5 range, but it's not blown out of the water
yet. It's not an 8, it's not a 9.
7 is a good place to put it.
7 seems seems sensible, right?
Yeah.
But the thing that's going to happen is, right, that's my idea of a 7. Let's say that Daniel...
Okay, one of the Xenagos player in our store, Mr. Lord and Stompy himself.
Yes, very avid standard player, very avid draft player.
Very good.
Yeah, he's also been playing Commander for a really long time and has a lot of really powerful Commander decks. So let's say he's built a new deck, only from cards that he owns. He hasn't really bought anything, but it has like some of the best cards from Standard over the last 10, 15 years, because that's like roughly how long he's been playing Magic for, right? Yeah. So he's just thrown in the cards that he owns that were great in Standard. He's like, yeah, this seems great in this human tribal deck or whatever, right? Maybe he trades someone for a couple more extra cards just to like round out the deck. He's like, yep, that sounds pretty good. The deck's super solid, but he knows for a fact it's not CEDH because he's seen some CEDH before. He knows that's not where it's at. So in his mind, he's like, okay, it's strong. It's not like CEDH, but it's strong. I reckon it's a 7.
Yeah, they're 2 very different decks.
They're completely different decks, right? But you can see how both of those people arrived at a 7. I think it's worth pointing out that neither of these people are intentionally, like, willfully lying about their deck. They just both genuinely think their deck is probably roughly a 7, right?
Yeah, and I've heard of people being really in favor of the number scale because it allows individuals to put their decks on an almost number line. Like if I got out all your decks, you could kind of arrange them in power level and put them almost on a number line kind of system. So it's a really good way of like personally going, this is my middle of the range deck in my collection.
Yeah.
This is my powerful deck and this is my jank pile of cards. Like that's where it sits. So in your collection where to pull decks from. But when you pair that against someone else's collection or someone else's Standard, it's very different. My 5 could be your 4, could be your 7, could be your 10. Like it's very different for each player. And I find that this is part of the reason why I don't like this system is especially because for example, I went to the Gold Coast and went to a game store in the Gold Coast. Never been there before, had no idea. So I took 2 Commander decks when I went to there. By the way, went up to see family and friends. Took 2 Commander decks, just in case.
James is always prepared.
And you know what's really funny, actually? I ended up in lockdown, and that was when I was on the Gold Coast and I got quarantined because I was a close contact.
Did.
Those 2 Commander decks saved my sanity in hotel lockdown because I ended up figuring out how to do webcam games. And jumped on, and played a couple of games with people online in webcam.
I'm shocked I missed out on that. That seems like the kind of thing that I would have hopped in on.
It was super fun.
Maybe I didn't have the setup yet.
Yeah, it was also, I was doing it with some of the guys that I've met in Queensland. They were teaching me. It was good fun. Anyway, but like, I had these 2 decks, and the decks that I bought at the time, this is at the start of last year, the ones that I took was Scarab God, and I took Niv Mizzet. Because in my brain, I was like, this is a level 5 to 7, and my level 8 to 10. Good decks to bring to like a random store.
Sure.
And I said, I've got a Scarab God deck and it's like medium kind of power. I'd probably put it at like a 6. And it's way, as we've discussed in this podcast, way more powerful than a 6 now. But at the time, I said it was about a 6 or a 7. And then I sat down at this table and these other guys were like, yeah, we've got decks at about a 6 or a 7. My 6 or 7 was their 10.
Really?
Yeah, my Scarab God deck. You think my Scarab God deck's good now? My God, it blew them out the water.
Wow.
But then I met up with another bunch of people at that store, different group of people. And again, this is like in the same store. I said, right, I've got this Scarab God deck, but it just completely annihilated those guys. I've also got my Niv Mizzet deck, which is, I'm trying to make it a CEDH deck. And they're like, oh, we play pretty high power, so play your Niv Mizzet deck. My really high-powered was a 2. They were cracking fetch lands and getting dual lands and dropping mana vaults and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, yeah, okay. And they're like casting Demonic Tutor and like getting combo pieces on turn 2. Like, that kind of level. And Niv at the time just was nowhere near. So one table, it was my 5 was a 10, and the other table, my 9 was a 3.
Well, and funnily enough, even when you're telling that story, and this is the other thing, like, I agree we should move away from the number scale, but I think we should also move away from, like, one-word answers to questions, because when you were describing that story, actually, in the second example, when you came to that group of people and were talking about your Scapegoat and Invisit deck, you just said one of them is almost CDH, and one of them is, just like beat those guys. And so like those are
very short answers,
still not numbers, but still like you're still giving like a super short way introduction to your deck. And like I'm not saying you need to give a super long introduction, but I think like those one word, because the other words you'll see thrown away under like optimized, right? Synergized.
Efficient.
Jank. Jank. Like all these labels are again super subjective, right? Because your jank, like I know players at our store where their jank would probably blow me out of the water.
I got a really good deck as an example for that. The Shizo low creatures. You know the Shizo legendary creature? It's an uncommon. Whenever a creature with power 1 or less...
Charade.
Charade, that's the one. Yeah, I got introduced... I think it was Vi, actually, that introduced me to that deck. And
I remember that deck, yeah.
And they kind of was like, oh, this is jank. This is a bunch of rats. It's really weird. They locked us out of the game on turn 4. I was like, wow.
Because that's the one where when a creature with power 2 or less you control dies, I think you return it at the end step, I think. Yeah.
So you just have a bunch of sack outlets, bunch of low powered, and just get value out. And
but like the thing is, most of the creatures in mono black that do that are making your opponent's discard.
Yeah.
So I think from memory, when I played against it as well, you just end up with no hand, and Vi can recur those creatures every time. I think Vi disassembled that deck not long after we played that game, actually. And
really?
I don't think they own it anymore.
Oh, that's a shame, because it was a really good deck.
It was really good, but it sat at this weird power level. Look, we'll talk about that later, but there are sort of decks that sit at this weird spot. So look, we don't want to talk about the numbers too much, because we don't love them as a way of introducing our deck. So what can we do instead?
But I'm glad we gave it a little bit of a shout out, because there are people that use this, and I think even if you want to give your deck a number scale, have a deeper conversation.
Yeah,
I think that's how we'll end that number scale.
Yeah, for sure. I agree.
Paper.
Yep.
Ready?
Paper being thrown.
All right. Cover your eyes. Hey, that is
okay. Nobody got hurt. That's nice.
Apart from the dog in the corner, he's dead.
So, look, if we're moving away from numbers, what are we moving towards instead? I'd actually like to shout out a podcast that I listen to every now and then. Not as much as I'd like to, because I don't have a lot of time now that I'm working on my own podcast. But the Commander Sphere, which is hosted by Dan Sheehan and Rachel Weeks. Rachel Weeks, a lot of you will probably know from. She's been on a lot of gameplay videos on YouTube.
She's been on Game Nights a couple of times.
She has been on Game Nights a couple of times. I think she's also been on Extra Turns from memory.
She's also really cool.
Yeah, she's just a really great... I follow her on Twitter. If you don't follow her on Twitter already, do it, for sure.
And if you don't use Twitter anymore, congratulations, you're a normal person. Everyone comment, Twitter's dead in the comments for what?
I wish Twitter was dead. Anyway, I shouldn't do that when James is drinking.
I had a map full of water.
Okay, so one of the things that they talked about in one of their episodes, which I thought was so interesting, was their version, when they were talking about power level, they said most players are after either the sizzle or the steak. So, what they mean by that is, for some people, Commander is about the way you end the game, the destination you arrive at, that last big spell, and that is what they would describe as the steak. The sizzle is about people who really enjoy the way the game progresses, seeing people who say stuff like, I love seeing my deck do the thing, right?
Maybe the Commander game is the friends we made along the way.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not saying that either of them is better or worse, but there is like a pretty fundamental difference in the way you're going to go about building your deck, right?
100%.
Because one group of people is going to be like, okay, I want to win like this. How do I make my deck get to that as quickly as possible? And a bunch of other people are going to be like, I think I want my deck to win something like this, but I really want to do it through these 5 cards. I want to play this card that synergizes with this card and see how that pops off. And I want everyone to go,
whoa!
Yeah, exactly, right? So it's the sizzle versus the steak.
Before we move on, I'm really, with this analogy, I'm really curious. I'm going to have my opinion held back, but I'm curious to know yours. A CDH player, what do you think they prefer, the sizzle or the steak?
I think you'd have to say the steak, but I think these things don't work in isolation,
Yeah.
I suppose. So in a funny sort of a way, the stake for the CDH player is also the like loads of interaction.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is kind of its own sizzle, right? Yeah. But you don't ever really build a CDH deck without a win con. Like there's like stacks decks that are, you know, in quotation marks, win conless in that they don't have a combo.
They usually have Approach of the Second Sun in it.
They might, but then they also just win through combat damage. That's what's called like win conless stacks in CDH because nobody wins through combat damage.
Beating someone with a 2/4 commander over and over
and basically,
over again. But it's interesting that you said that because in my opinion, it's more about the sizzle.
Right.
Because like, I'm now playing a lot of CDH, and I can't wait to talk about CDH more on this podcast because I think it's an area of Commander that more casual players should look at as another way to play Commander. Regardless, by the by, I've been playing a lot recently, and I've noticed something about CDH games. Everyone's face is super lit up, even when they're countering spells and they're getting blown out and all those kind of stuff. It's really interesting. Right at the end of the game, though, someone goes, Thassa's Oracle, Demonic Consult. And everyone goes, right, shuffle up, do it again. No one cares about the end of the game.
Right.
Everyone's all about that start of the game, fast manner, who's getting out. It's like, it's almost like a horse race. And it's really exciting when horse races are close at the very end, when there's a photo finish and there's lots of interaction right at the end. But a lot of the time, there's one horse that blows out the gate and gets to the end pretty quick. So the excitement is that like right at the gate, blowing out, like right, like getting them going, like see if you can get it out. Yeah, I was really interested to hear your opinion as like as someone that doesn't play a lot of CDH.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think everyone wants to play games of Commander that are close and that are
you
like
don't
super
want boring games.
No, and super interactive. And so, like, yeah, that includes CDH players because CDH players are Commander players, right? But yeah, I guess it's more like the deck building process. I would say is different. Where when you're building the deck for CDH. You're not really about the sizzle. You want your interaction, but you're building your deck to win a particular way, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Whereas the way that, for instance, I don't really have a CDH deck. Like when I'm building my decks, I'm thinking about what kind of fun plays I want to get up to. I'm not really thinking about the win almost at all. I'm like, okay, I should have some way of winning in the end. Shout out to episode 1 of the podcast.
End the game, people.
You have to end the game sometimes. But in general, I'm all about that. Yeah, all the friends we made along the way.
Maybe the real win con is the friends we made along the way.
Actually works surprisingly well. But look, we did actually talk about this in episode 2.
Yeah.
How we should introduce our deck if we're not going to use those numbers.
Yeah.
And the 3 questions we asked, and I'd like to bring them up again because I think they're pretty good in my opinion.
I feel like this won't be the last time we talk about
this.
No,
I think it's just like a good principle to
We're
work
in episode 9. We've talked about this twice already. Get ready for episode 16. We'll talk about it again.
Roughly, yeah. It comes up every now and then, yep. So the questions that we raised in episode 1 were, this is what you would ask someone before the game. How does your deck win? How consistently does it reach that win condition? How does it prevent opponents from winning?
Okay, I have an idea.
Okay.
Let's do some practice runs. Okay. Let's take these 3 questions and sit down at a table and play some Commander together. We'll forget about let's just go play some Commander. Let's use some of our decks and go through these as an example. So, I'm going to say, first off the cab of the rank, your Kruk Chroma deck. Your Kruk, the Thumbless, and a Chroma. So we're asking these 3 questions. I'm playing my Kruk and a Chroma deck. Yeah. What am I going to say? I'm going to ask you, Walt, how does your deck win?
It wins by polymorphing into Mirrorwing Dragon and then copying my spells a bunch of times for 1,000,000 creatures.
Oh, that's really cool. How many other creatures are in the deck for the chance of that to happen?
There's like 2 creatures that do that. Wow. And I have to polymorph into them, and there's like 4 spells that polymorph.
Wow. So it's like, it could go good, but he's got that chance.
It's probably not going to go good.
Okay, but how consistently do you think you reach that win condition? Like, how many times have you played the deck and how many times do you get it?
I reckon 20% of the time I blow everyone out of the water, and the other 80% I do nothing.
80% of the time, actually, this is really funny. 80% of the time you are flipping coins with Kruk and doing nothing.
And failing my coin flips, usually, yeah.
Okay, so if that's your win condition, how do you stop me from winning the game? Is there any like really horrible stacks pieces that I should be aware of or what?
No, it's just straight up removal. Like,
classic kill the creature.
Yeah, lightning bolts sort of things. I'm removing creatures, but mostly I'm just trying to get my ridiculous thing to work.
Okay, fantastic. Now I know exactly what your deck does. That was a good conversation, actually. That felt really informative. I know exactly what your deck does, and now I know what I should think about in my collection that matches that kind of level.
Yeah.
If you're only expecting to win 20% of the time, I'm not gonna pull out my POWAH deck. All right.
Well, speaking of, let's say that you are pulling out that POWAH deck. Let's say I haven't introduced Cryochroma, so you don't know that you shouldn't play it.
Yeah. Okay. So we're starting a new
game of Commander. Yep. I can see you pull out your POWAH deck. I'm like, okay, James. How does your POWAH deck win?
Okay, the deck actually has a couple of ways of winning. The first way is flooding the board with lots of plants and spreading those +1 counters across, and then doing a Triumph of the Hordes or Overwhelming Stampede kind of effect.
Sure.
The other way of winning is getting one very, very big plant and doing something like a fling effect.
Okay.
I've got a Kazul's Fury in there, I've got a Fling, a couple of redundancies, or I've got this incredible equipment that's called Mage Slayers. It's a Gruul equipment.
I think it's just called Mage Slayer.
Mage Slayer? Yeah, it's really fun. This is actually a podcast recommendation. You should look up this card.
It's good fun.
I think it's also quite cheap. Maybe it's a Thrifty Thursdays possibility.
I don't think it's very expensive, no.
Yeah, so it's a really fun equipment. When the equipped creature attacks, it deals the damage to a player being attacked equal to its power. Immediately, on attack.
Yep.
Mwah.
Doesn't even need to connect.
Love that.
Absolutely crazy.
So
you're usually winning with combat damage in this file.
Combat damage, or I have one copy of Goblin Bombardment, for example, and I can just throw all the plants at you.
But usually combat.
Usually combat damage, or
sometimes a sack thing. Yeah. Okay, cool. How consistent is it, do you reckon, at winning like that?
Pretty consistent now. It used to be pretty low powered, but now I have, for example, a Crucible of Worlds, a Raminap Excavator, and an Ancient Green Warden.
Wow, okay.
And I have lots of effects to play multiple lands. So if I have a Fabled Passage in my bin, I can put up to 18, 24 +1 counters on a creature or multiple creatures in a turn.
Wow.
So it's pretty consistent. I'd say nowadays it's 60% of the time it'll win. It's pretty stumpy.
Okay. And how are you going to be stopping me from winning if I'm trying to win?
There are a couple of effects that, my first effect is forcing you to block, protecting your life total.
Sure, yeah.
The next effect is I love using the Goblin Bombardment removal strategy.
Right, just remove all my creatures by sacking your plants.
I can get 1 million plants. You could play a deck that only has a couple. I'm going to remove them pretty easily.
Sure.
But there's not actually a lot of destroy target this, destroy target that. I've got a couple of enchantment removal things, but that's about it. It's pretty low on removal. It more does its thing quite quickly.
Cool. See that, again, I feel like we ended up at a spot. But to be honest, the most informative question I think here was how consistent is it? Because the deck's strategy itself was pretty straightforward. It's combat. There's some sack effects and stuff. But it was when you said I have these 3 contingencies: Ancient Green Warden, Crucible of Worlds, Raminap Excavator,
that I can play lands from graveyard.
In my head, I'm going, okay, this is a strong deck.
Yeah,
right? This has got a lot of ways of backing up itself and everything.
It's funny because I was really tempted when we were role playing that out. I was really tempted to say, but I don't run the dual fetch lands. I don't run those. I only have, in terms of fetches, I only have Terramorphic Expanse, Fabled Passage, Evolving Wilds, and I guess you could count Myriad Landscape. It comes in tapped, so it's not
slow,
the same.
Though,
yeah, so those 3 are my only fetches. So a lot of the time, I actually tutor for an Evolving Wilds, which is super lame. But honestly, if you can play an Evolving Wilds from your graveyard 3 times in a turn...
Oh, yeah, I've done it. Yeah, it's absolutely nuts. Yeah, for sure. So interesting. So that was a different sort of... Yeah, I think it differed from my Cryochroma deck, mostly in the consistency thing. My Cryochroma deck almost never reached its win con. Yours was pretty consistent almost all of the time.
Because I have a lot of contingency. I said, I've got Kazul's Fury and Fling. Yeah. I've got these 3 effects that say the same thing.
Sure.
I've got lots of things that do the same stuff in my deck, which means I reach it quite consistently.
Yeah, for sure. Well, for a slightly different change of pace, let's say I've start a new game. I'm pulling out my Sisay Shrines deck.
So in this scenario, you heard my fire left deck and went, yep, nope, moving to a different part.
Potentially, yeah.
So your Sisei Shrine deck.
Yes.
All right. First question: how does it win? I'm assuming shrines.
It wins by getting Sanctum of All out, and usually with the shrine that drains people. So I'm
winning.
I'm gonna get multiple shrines triggers in my upkeep, and I'm gonna drain you all for a bunch of life.
So I'm pretty familiar with shrines, and there are some things that shrines do that remove my stuff. How big is your deck on stopping me from winning?
Well, it's actually pretty stacksy. So because I can tutor anything from any legendary with Sisei, I actually have a bunch of sort of like legendaries that stop you from doing stuff. Like
Kuronos, the hound that...
Yeah, I've got Kunoros in there.
Well, I'm not playing my 5, don't I?
Yeah, probably not. It's got quite a few ways actually of stacking out, like a few like rule of law style things where you can only cast one spell a turn.
Well, I'll put my Mizzix deck away there.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually pretty difficult to play against in that way.
Okay, interesting. But, like, how often do you think your deck will win through shrines? Because, like, shrines is a very delicate thing to get. How consistently does it win, do you reckon?
It's a pretty standard kind of win rate. Like, it wins if I can get enough of the shrines, but if people remove them early, it's pretty hard for me to come back.
Yeah.
It's reasonably solid, but it's not backbreaking, I think.
Okay. All right. Well, I've got a deck that matches that kind of thing and can play around rule of law effects. So, yeah.
Cool.
What another fantastically done card. We should do this on stage. This is brilliant. Can we do one more?
Yeah, sure.
We've mentioned it so many times. I'm really curious. I actually don't know how I'm going to answer this, so this is a good one. My Scarab God deck. I'm going to pull it out. Oh,
yeah. Okay. I mean, well, for one, there's an implicit lie in this scenario, which is that you could actually pull out your Scarab God deck and I could say, okay, I'm going to leave, James.
And then I'll be standing going, does anybody want to play? Does anyone want to go up against zombies?
Okay, let's pretend I don't know James's Scarab God deck.
You're not Walt. Scenario. Your name is Jared. You're Jared now.
Hey, James.
What was that?
James.
Yes, Jared. This man I've just met.
James, how does your deck win, mate? How does Scarab God win the game?
Well, tradie that I've just found on the street that wants to play a game of Commander. My deck wins. It's actually a Scarab God deck that generally wins not through flooding the board with zombies and going to combat and having lots of zombie buff effects. It generally wants to do things like Paradox Haze effects, where it has enough zombies to give me enough value on the scry to get the right cards I need, drain my opponents for enough on the turn, but then do it again for a Paradox Haze effect, and then do it again for a Sphinx of the Second Sun effect.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sweet. And, like, how consistent do you reckon a deck is at, like, making that happen? Because that sounds, like, pretty crazy to me.
Well, just as consistently as you take Smokos, I'd say it's...
Oh, every day, mate. I'm going to stop.
I'm trying so hard to stay in character. It's just too good.
Jared's retired, all right?
Jared's gone.
He's gone.
Well, I'm so glad you're back. My deck wins pretty consistently. It wins pretty consistently, but it wins in pretty, like, ruthless ways. Like, it is unapologetic. It will steal cards from your graveyard, and it will mill you down, and it will take stuff away.
Sure, and you said it's pretty consistent. Like, do you have a lot of ways to tutor stuff to your hand or to the graveyard?
I now have... I used to not do this, but now I have more because I found the deck was more fun to play at a higher power.
Sure.
And cards like Sphinx of the Second Sun, I want to cast. So I now run Demonic Tutor, Diabolical Tutor, Entomb, and, by the way, Entomb and Reanimate are both in the deck. So on turn 2... I could entomb something and reanimate Sheoldred, for example.
Wow.
So, like, I mean, I take 8 life, but it's pretty quick and pretty good at getting those pieces.
So, Sheoldred's a good example. Like, what other kinds of ways of interacting with my board am I likely to expect? Like, how else are you going to be stopping me from doing my stuff?
I could get Fleshbag Marauder out in the battlefield a couple of times.
Sure, yeah.
Make you sack a bunch of creatures. I've also got a couple of effects that, like, stealing from you is a big thing. Taking stuff from your graveyard if you play any kind of graveyard.
Oh, right.
Stuff.
Scarab God just does that, right?
Yeah. On the card, pay 4 mana and just take a creature from the graveyard, basically. So probably, like, Merrin's a good matchup, but, like, it probably not because I'll take the thing before you take it or you use it.
Right.
Yeah. And like, I will take multiple, extra upkeeps and stuff like that. So I'm playing my deck quite a lot. You'll probably not play your deck a lot.
I want to congratulate you, James, on actually being like, that was a very accurate, representation of what Scarab is like. I thought maybe you would try and undersell it a little bit and be a bit like, oh, it's not too bad. But like, no, you were pretty accurate. Like, it's pretty difficult to play against because there's the tutors there, because it gets to those things really consistently. So I think, again, the key question there was probably the consistency one.
Yeah. I also think with the Scarab one, the thing that would turn, and again with your Sisay, it's how do you stop me winning? Is they're the questions that would turn players, like for example, in that roleplay situation where you said, I have rule of law effects, and I'm like, ew, I'll put my Mizzix deck away. A Storm player would go, oh, I don't want to play against that. Yeah. So like they will know, like, oh, I don't really like those kinds of effects because it stops me from doing stuff. And then you can go, all right, maybe not Sisay. Like, it encourages conversation. That's what it does.
Yeah. And look, those conversations were great. They're obviously a little bit of an ideal world where probably everyone knows each other really well. Everyone's pretty comfortable talking. So like, we're not always going to get to quite that level.
Yeah.
So there's a few ways we can kind of shortcut the process and get straight to the nitty gritty. It's not as ideal as a proper conversation, but we can kind of get to the most important stuff. So in the Sisay example, the main thing that I do these days, and I don't know, maybe some people find this controversial or something, but I just, with almost any deck I play now, I pull out every card that I think might make someone salty before the game.
I like that.
So, like, in my Sisay deck, I just pull out every stacks piece.
I appreciate that, actually.
I just pull out, like, the Rule of Law. I pull out the Kanoros. I pull out, I think I had Yashan in there for a little while. Like, the cards that I think are most likely for someone to look at it and go, oh, wow, this sucks. I can't play my deck.
So, for like, if I was doing my Scarab God, I'd be like, right, here's my Sheldred. Here's my Flesh Bag. Here's my Plaguecrafter. Like, I'm going to make you sack your creatures. If you don't like that, sorry, this is what my deck is. Tell me.
And I think, funnily enough, the other thing, you don't necessarily need to pull them out, but the thing that you would probably want to allude to there, and you did when we were talking about it, is how many tutors you have. Ways of tutor into the graveyard, ways of tutor into your hand.
And how quick I could do it, too. That was another thing that I said. The fact that I run Entomb and Reanimate, that means if I swamp turn 1, swamp turn 2, boom, boom. Like...
Yeah. Well, and those tutors, I think, in isolation of any other card, are probably the most likely to increase your consistency rate, right? Like, you can take any deck, any win condition, and if you take it from 0 tutors to 5 tutors, I reckon that deck becomes, like, substantially better. There's a great phrase that nitpicking nerds use, funnily enough, when they're talking about their decks, where they describe every tutor as, this is another copy of best card in the deck.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
So, like, if I'm playing my Chroma deck, right, I always need to that's another copy of Mirroring Dragon, or it's another copy of Polymorph. Like, it's another copy of whichever card I need most right then. Yeah. And that single-handedly takes your deck so many pegs higher in the power level sort of ratings.
Interesting.
Just doing that.
I'm gonna pause the podcast for a hot second. Do you run Sunforger in Chroma?
I don't.
How expensive are the polymorphs?
The polymorphs... Oh, I see what you're getting at here.
I'm just thinking this might be another way to get polymorphs.
I think most of them are sorceries, actually. And you have to get an instant. It's got to be a red or white instant.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything I could get. There's funnily enough, there's one that costs 4, but not in my library, because it has Undaunted. Do you remember that mechanic? Yeah. It costs 1 less for each opponent you have.
Weird commander mechanic that appears once every
I hope they bring it back.
It's such a weird one.
It's interesting. Yeah. It's interesting. It's such a small hoop to jump through in Commander that maybe it's not worth printing.
But it's also really weird when you get to like the late game and you're in 1-on-1 or you have a pot of 5 or it's weird. It's like, do I include this card because it's really good in these situations, but not in this? Yeah. Anyway, we're digressing a little bit. But my next thing that I wanted to point out is tutors, are a fantastic thing to talk about because it is a redundancy. It is, I'm going to get the best card in my deck. That applies really strongly with certain deck strategies. Combo. If you are going up against a combo deck and they're like, this is a combo deck, it wins with this, ask them, how many tutors do you run? Because if they say they run 3, it's gone up just immediately because they're getting the pieces they need. But there is another thing that all decks will bump in power, and it's mana acceleration.
Right.
So it doesn't matter what strategy you're playing, if you have a ton of mana really quickly, you can do more things.
It's true. I think I would probably immediately draw the line here between like ramp and like even strong ramp and fast mana.
Different thing entirely.
Yeah, so fast mana, for those who don't know, is sort of a colloquial term for anything that gets you more mana than it cost in the first place.
Or it puts you immediately ahead of a traditional turn mana curve.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it basically costs you nothing in the turn that you do it, or it costs you nothing in a sense. So sometimes it actually costs you nothing, like Mana Crypt. Yep, Chrome Mox, Mana Crypt, both examples of things that literally cost 0.
That is, you cannot define anything else as other fast mana.
Yeah. Sol Ring is 1 mana and gets you 2 mana the turn it comes down. Yeah. I think it's probably not worth mentioning in the pre-game conversation Sol Ring because pretty much everyone's going to have it.
And also Sol Ring's one of those cards that's super accessible because it's in every precon. Yeah. It's like, it's not one of those cards that you should talk about. Mana Crypt, though, that's something you should talk about because if you have a Mana Crypt in your opening hand, compared to Sol Ring, there's a couple of things that a lot of people don't realize. And I know this because I play with Mana Crypt and Sol Ring. Turn 1 Sol Ring, fantastic. But now turn 1, you've only got 2 colorless mana. Mana Crypt turn 1, you've got 2 colorless mana and the land you play.
Oh, that's an untapped land. That's your colored source.
Big difference. You can do, for example, a...
Cultivate.
Cultivate. Yeah, you can cultivate turn 1.
Wow.
I don't know why you play Mana Crypt on a green deck.
Maybe not necessarily.
You got Exploration and Azusa.
Yeah, maybe you don't need. Maybe you don't need. Yeah, it's true. I definitely think... Look, cards like Mana Crypt, they don't... Sometimes people will see a card like Mana Crypt and go, oh, wow, I didn't want to play CDH. And it's like, that's too far, I think.
Yeah.
But you can't deny that it does significantly increase the power of the deck.
100%.
It doesn't mean that the person you're playing against is pub stomping you. And I say this because, unfortunately, there's a real narrative online of people posting... I go on the EDH subreddit a lot.
Dangerous place.
A lot of people post and say, man, I just wanted to play a cruisy battle cruiser deck. And then this guy drops Mana Crypt on turn 1. It's like, well, that doesn't automatically mean he was pub stomping you. He maybe should have warned you about it, and he maybe should have said, like, yeah, this deck's pretty strong. It runs cards like Mana Crypt in it.
Yeah.
But, yeah, anyway.
I think that the fast mana is a really interesting conversation because, like, sometimes, like, a lot of, you crack a pack and you get a Chrome Mox. And you're like, hey, yeah, I'm going to put this in my favorite deck. And then you drop it and people might get scared. But that's your only piece of fast mana.
Yeah.
Something like that. Just be honest with the table and kind of like highlight a couple of things because you don't want to scare someone off on turn 1 because that results in the horrible thing of someone seeing something and going, I scoop. And just leaving.
Yeah, we never want to have that.
We want to avoid that conversation. And that the whole power level conversation in the turn rule 0 thing is to avoid that.
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree. And look, again, if we're talking in terms of that sort of shortcutting the longer conversation, so we do love the, how does your deck win? How consistent does it win? How does it prevent opponents from winning? All that stuff is great. But again, we want to be starting small, right? Simple conversations.
And we do understand, that so many people that play Magic the Gathering do not want to engage in full-blown conversations with strangers in a game store. Sure. It can be really intimidating, especially when you're talking about something you've made. So I think there's a couple of tips and tricks we can give to make these conversations easier to have and shorter and condense them. Find the real information first and then you can get into your game.
Sure. And I think a good way to start here is by thinking about the kinds of things that... I wrote down a few sentences here of things that I think people are likely to say in the pre-game conversation, even if it's short, and how you can extrapolate from that, right?
And find more out.
Yeah. So the right questions to ask to follow up. So, let's say I've sat down, I've pulled out a pre-con, and I've said, someone's sort of going like, oh, what kind of game are we after? And I've said, this is a pre-con. Immediately, I would want to ask, how many cards are different from the pre-constructed deck? Like, is this a straight up vanilla out of the box pre-constructed deck? Or is this an upgraded pre-con? Because we're going to talk, and even the number of cards here is going to mean a lot, right? 5 cards versus 20 cards is going to be a really different deck, right? Yeah,
for sure. Like I have this conversation a lot with new players because I always make sure to have my Oboon pre-con with me. And I've swapped a card in that pre-con deck. I love it. I mean, I mention it so much because it should have been in the pre-con anyway because it was a Zendikar pre-con. And one of the best white landfall cards, Feladar's Retreat, was printed. and it wasn't in the pre-con.
Yeah.
Bonkers. Absolutely. So I was like, take out Basic Forest, put that in, done.
Yeah. That card's so good. What are the two modes? It's like either put a +1 counter on each creature you control, they gain vigilance until end of turn. Already nuts.
That alone, if that was just what the card did, good.
Or I think it's you make a 2/2 cat beast.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's the 2/2 cat beast. It's a 2/2 cat of some description, but I'm not sure if it's the beast. But yeah. It's like if the card just gave vigilance and a +1 counter, I think it would be bonkers even if it was just +1 till end of turn and vigilance.
Yeah.
That would have been fine. Like, it still would have been good. It's strong. It's a silly card.
In this example, right, you just made one swap. So if you say, hey, I'm playing this precon, and I'm like, how many cards have you swapped? And you say 1, I'm like, okay, I'm basically just playing a vanilla precon.
Yeah, and I can even show you, and we can have that conversation about how broken the card is and how all that kind of stuff. But that is one card in my 99.
Yeah, you might never see that card in the whole game.
I don't have tutors in my precon.
No.
Do you think I run an Enlightened tutor in my precon?
Oh my god, imagine if they printed that in a precon.
Yeah, there you go. But like, that's... So already I understand, okay, if we're having a precon game, I want to know, did you build this precon level deck? Did you build it?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people say, oh, I have a precon level deck. And if they say that, another good question to ask is, did you build it?
Yeah. Because is it a precon or precon level? Because that's the word you use. You said this is a precon level deck. And very different thing.
I'll give you a really good example of this. My Elves deck. I built that, and we actually mentioned this on the last episode, on the budget episode.
We did, yeah.
Because I built it very budget, very low to the ground, very low power, and over time I got, Craterhoof Behemoth, I got a Priest of Titiana, and I got all these things, and now it's not. But I used to introduce it as a precon level deck. And
I think that was accurate as well.
At the time, but I think there was probably a period where I was introducing it as a precon level deck, and I didn't think about the upgrades I'd made to it since I started it. So just asking, if they say a key word to listen to is a precon level,
yes.
If they say the word level, they've probably built it, and you should probably investigate a little more.
Yes, you should. You should. Another thing that you might hear would be something like, this deck is solid. Not offering a lot of information here, but if I just said to you, James, this deck is solid,
I would probably respond with, okay, first off the bat, does it have any infinites? Any infinite combos?
An infinite combo.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You're immediately going to get a very different answer, right? Yeah. Like, no, I usually win through combat is very different from, yes. I do.
And then I can go, okay, you've got an infinite. Is it an instant win? Like, does it win on the spot?
Or is it infinite mana, which then requires a payoff? Yeah.
Is it infinite tokens, which then requires you to get through to combat? Or is it really conditional? Is it...
Well, and this would, funnily enough, bring us right back around to the next question I would ask, and you said before, actually, are there any tutors? Because again, like, if you've got an infinite combo, but you have to find those 2 exact cards, that's going to be less likely than something that has 2 exact cards and 5 tutors, right?
Because someone could build Niv Mizzet Perun and include Curiosity, which if you've played me and played my Niv Mizzet deck or just play in our store, you know that's an infamous combo that I play. But I run tutors and in ways to get those cards and all that kind of stuff. But if you just run that card in your 99 with no way of getting it, no way of drawing ridiculously... I mean, Niv Mizzet is a way of drawing ridiculously, but like no other ways of like really digging to your deck, it's not that bad.
No, and to be honest, I mean, look, we've joked about it when I originally played against your Niv Mizzet deck, and it did run Curiosity, but mostly the rest of it was reasonably janky.
Yeah.
And look, like, we do joke about how awful it was to play against, but mostly it was fine. Like,
and that was also at a time where all of us didn't know how to build decks.
It's true. But I think asking if someone has an infinite combo is a really good question, because you're also immediately, hopefully, going to get, if anyone at the table does not want to play against an infinite combo, they're probably going to say then, like, okay, sorry, I'm just sort of after more like this kind of a game.
And it's exactly what you did with your salty cards. Like, I run Expropriate. Yeah. It's one of those things, like, if you feel comfortable to say BT dubs, I run Niv Mizzet and Curiosity. Like, someone might be like, I don't want to be pinged to infinite death with Niv Mizzet. That's just boring. Like, awesome. Glad we've got that out of the way.
Yeah. And look, I actually, this isn't something I planned originally, but for a little while I had my Cards of Wizards deck, which gets a mention every episode somehow.
You know what was really funny? As I was walking into this room, I made a plan, and I was like, I'm not going to bring it up. But at the end of the episode, if we don't mention it, I'm just going to go, Kaza.
Well, you've indicated. I brought it up of my own volition.
There we go. It's mentioned again.
Oh my god. Anyway, I had, and I think I've talked about this before, I had a Ghostly Flicker infinite combo with, I had 2 different creatures. I think it's Narumeha and Dualcaster Mage. So in either of those cases, you basically get to infinitely flicker the Dualcaster Mage with casting the Ghostly Flicker, and if you literally just target a land,
you got infinite mana.
Right there, right?
Yeah.
And I used to mention before every single game, I have this one infinite combo in there. And what I actually did is I had like 2 or 3 cards sort of tucked behind my tokens that sat in the box with Kaza. And sometimes people would be like, oh, I sort of am after more like this kind of a game. And I'd be like, that's fine. I'll take out Ghostly Flicker and put in this card instead.
I did the exact same thing with Zaxara and Freed from the Real and Penzora.
Right.
And I actually just had 2 forests.
Oh, just like, yep,
I was like,
more
sure
mana.
Thing. I mean, Zaxara's casting 19 ramp spells, so it's like, fine.
That makes sense.
It's really funny, especially like with those really common cards, because sometimes, and you've done this before actually with your Wizards deck, that you took out Ghostly Flicker and you still went infinite with the use of someone else's deck. I can't remember what story this was.
Oh, I did.
Yeah, and I can't remember what it was, but like, I think mentioning cards in your deck like Ghostly Flicker is not a bad way to talk about it, because you can sneeze and Ghostly Flicker goes infinite.
Yeah.
Like, it is such an easy thing to break.
It's true. But also, like, on that same vein, right? Ghostly Flicker is with Dualcaster Mage. Like, it's a 2-card infinite combo, right? And Narume has another version of that card. But if I take Ghostly Flicker out, then suddenly, like, there might still be a way of going infinite. And funnily enough, I discovered one day that there was still a way of going infinite, even without Ghostly Flicker in the deck, because I had Dualcaster Mage and I had Molten Echoes, where I would, every time a creature ETBs, you make a copy of it.
Oh.
I think you have to name a creature type, and then you get a copy every time, and so I just chose Wizards.
Oh dear.
Anyway, and then I also had the last level of Mirari Conjecture, so every time I cast something, it was copied. It was some sort of ridiculous... I was like, oh no, that's infinite. Like...
You did it me!
I did it you. But it's funny because, interestingly, because at the start of that game, I had said, like, hey, I've got this Ghostly Flicker combo, and people, they were like, oh, we're actually playing precons, they've only got a few upgrades. And I was like, that's fine, I'll take it out. So I didn't have Ghostly Flicker in the deck that game, but I still went infinite. But funnily enough, they all still felt fine about it.
Because it was so convoluted.
It was so convoluted. Because this is the other thing with infinite combo, right? And you were saying before, like, the kind of questions that you ask, like, is there tutors and everything, is, like, often it's worth asking, how many cards is it? How many cards do you need to complete the infinite? Because if it's like 5 or 6, almost no one's going to feel bad about the fact that you saw it coming 4 cards ago, you know, like...
This is the thing, like 2-card infinite combos is something that can happen on a single turn. If you are playing a Jesus Pig combo...
Vice Jesus Pig, yeah.
It doesn't matter. Like, I'm not mad. Like, if anything, I'm now a very... I don't know if you'd call me a wizened Magic player or a Zen player, but like it's hard to upset me in games these days. I find that I get more upset with the social aspect. Like if someone's just talking for a long time and not making game actions, that upsets me. But in terms of playing certain cards or winning in certain ways, I don't get bothered. If anything, if you win in a really cool way that some people hate, I'm going to go, that was cool. Good job.
Yeah. I think that's just being a good commanding player as 100%. Well, right? Yeah, for sure. And look, again, we talked about a few ways you can shortcut this process. It's always worth having in some way, right? So really, when you sit down and when you go to the store, like, have in your mind, I'm going to make an effort to have that conversation. Because I'm going to be completely honest with you, I've got a bit of social anxiety. I don't sit down at the table and go, oh, I'm really looking forward to this pre-game conversation. I say to myself, I could just sit here and the game will happen anyway, but I'd rather make an effort.
Good time.
Yeah, I want to have a good time, and I'm going to make an effort and be a little bit pushy about it, because then everyone's going to be honest about it and we'll end up with a better game.
For all the Waltz out there, you can do it. Like, what we said about, how many cards have been changed for a pre-con, are there any infinites? These little questions that you can ask, just get yourself to do it. But for all the Jameses out there that yell across a table about how good their phone battery is... help out the other players at the table. If you see that there is a bit of, resistance to have this conversation and you are someone that can have these conversations, I'm not saying yell at people. I'm saying gently encourage this conversation. Put your own deck on the line first.
Yeah.
Say, these are the cards that you might be hate me on. These are the ways that I'm going to win. What about you? If you lay out a way to say it in a really simple way, they're going to basically mirror you. It's a really simple way of doing it. It'd be like, these are the cards that you might not like. My deck wins like this. It wins pretty consistently. What about you? They're probably going to go, oh, I have these cards that you might not like. My deck wins like this, and it's this consistent.
Yeah.
3 points. Like, it's the same thing, right? It's the same thing, the questions we were talking about before. But for all the Jameses out there that, thankfully don't suffer with social anxiety, go out and actually help people that are finding it hard to have these conversations, because they want to have good games too.
Yeah, exactly. And look, one way we can make these conversations easier as well, when they do have to happen, well, they should happen all the time, not that they have to happen, is if you have the means, try to bring multiple power levels of decks to your game. So we've given you a bunch of ways to differentiate between your power levels. So you should now have the tools, I think, to work out roughly where they sit. Like, don't do the number scale thing again, but look at your decks and be honest and go like, oh, okay, that's got 5 tutors and an infinite combo. This is combat and it doesn't have any tutors, that kind of thing.
Yep.
And try to have, I reckon, a pre-con level deck, keyword pre-con level. Pre-con level. Like a synergistic deck that's pretty solid.
That has a good strategy and good win cons, good interaction.
Yeah, but not a powerful deck, which I think is the third one you should have.
And that's where you're running into cards like Demonic Tutor or Mana Crypt or the ones that we've mentioned already.
Yeah, and I think that the reason I've been a bit unclear about the categories is I think it should vary depending on what kind of games you're after. Because, I don't have a CDH deck. So my powerful deck is never going to be a CDH deck. No. So my powerful deck is probably just going to be the pretty strong budget deck that I own. I've got a Tygam deck that can string together extra turn spells.
Azor is pretty these days.
Yeah, my Azor the Lawbringer deck is pretty solid as well. So that's the kind of thing that sits at my top end. But for you, your powerful deck is a CDH
That's
deck.
my Niv deck. That's the deck that I have to say, this is a CDH game, everybody. And I think I'm going to kind of interject here with a quick conversation about CDH. Because we've mentioned it a couple of times in this episode already, but for those that haven't heard of CDH before, it stands for Competitive Elder Dragon Highlander, which is basically, this is the most powerful you can make your deck. As powerful as you can get it, regardless of price, interaction, saltiness, anything. The friends you make along the way, bullshit. Nothing. This CDH is winning the game as effectively and efficiently as possible and stopping your opponents from doing just that. CDH is a different way of playing Commander, and I actually think that some people end up accidentally in a CDH pod without a CDH deck. And there's something that happens automatically. They have a bad time because the rules. This is how Rule 0 in CDH goes. I'm playing Joyra Cheerio Storm. All right, fantastic. I'm playing Niv Mizzet Curiosity Control Combo. Okay, I'm playing Vile Smasher and Thrasios. Yep, brilliant. I'm playing Timnah Farm. I'm like, cool. All right, everyone, shuffle up. Let's play. That is the Rule 0 conversation in CDH. You know everyone's deck, how it wins, and what cards they're probably going to include to stop you.
Yeah. Just
by them saying what structure it is, because there is an optimal way of building CDH decks. That's just how it is. There are perfect Niv Mizzet Curiosity combo lists, and I'm trying to get mine to be as that as possible. So when I say I'm playing Niv Mizzet Control Curiosity, everyone goes, I know exactly what you're going to be doing. There's going to be a ton of blue counter spells. You're probably going to go land, pass, and then if I see Niv hit the board, I need to kill it immediately because that Curiosity could be round the corner. If I see a lab man hit the table, you're probably going to win it another way. That's the Rule 0 conversation. If you're a player that sat down at a table and someone says CDH and you've got a powerful deck, you might not have a CDH deck.
I would even go a step further and say you probably don't have a CDH deck. You probably don't.
If you can't call it CDH, it's probably not. And this is, I've found this, and we're actually running at our store at the moment in our community, we're running a welcome to CDH event, which is really exciting because we're introducing CDH as a format, but one of the things that we were experiencing was some people building powerful decks in keeping those pet cards in them and not making that ruthless cut of going, I just need Thassa Demonic Consultation.
Yeah.
Like, it's really brutal. And this is the thing, if you sit down at one of those tables, you're going to have a terrible time. And unfortunately, you're probably going to frustrate the CEDH players.
Because their decks are actually built to go up against other CEDH decks.
Correct.
And weirdly enough, yeah, like some of their things are going to make you feel really awful, and some of your things are going to make them feel really awful because they're not adequately prepared for it. And yeah, look, I think if there's one thing I can say about CEDH, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but like when you build a powerful deck, you usually start with a deck that's pretty solid and you slowly add things.
Yeah.
A CEDH deck starts from a list you find online, and then you make a few choices regarding which cards to include.
You're very accurate in that. And I think that with this CEDH event, the Welcome to CEDH event that our Greensboro Commander community is running, that's how most players went about building their list. And honestly, now I'm really excited for the competition. It's on August 6th at the Good Games Greensboro store. If you want to come along and watch, I might get a turn 1 win. Who knows? It's really fun. And you can rock up and you can learn about CEDH at this event without registering or without anything. We'll happily talk you through it.
Yeah, there's no fee.
There's no fee. Yeah, there's a fee for competing in the bracket with the prize support.
But that's already closed anyway.
It's already closed. And if you want to come along and have a look, it'll be really good fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, the thing that I kind of want to drive home is CEDH is a whole different bubble. It is not 9-10 power scale. If you're using that number line again, CEDH isn't a 9 or 10. It's an 11. It falls off the 1 to 10. It is a different thing. And it's funny that you said the whole, a strong deck is going from a solid start, a synergistic deck, to a powerful deck. My Niv Mizzet deck, it's really fun because you were actually there when I made the decision. I said, Niv Mizzet is now too powerful to play in casual pods. I'm making it CEDH. You were there when that decision happened. But it's funny, I didn't then start building more cards and putting more and more into Niv. I stripped it down. I completely tore it apart. I kept the cards that were CEDH level and removed everything else.
Funnily enough, I remember around that time, I sort of had... probably at the time a not super strong idea of what CEDH was. And so I saw a couple other cards and I was like, James, because you were trying to make some really difficult cuts. I remember, to make room for the ones you wanted to add.
Like Mirari Conjecture was one I was really torn over because I found it so cool.
Yeah. And so as we were having these conversations, I was like, I don't think the Niv Mizzet usually runs like something like this. And you were like, no, actually, I found a couple of lists online that do that. And that's the kind of different conversation you're talking about. You're not talking about like, can I make a justification for this pet card? And like, can I find room for this card whose art I really love? It's like, no. You're finding the list and you're like tweaking it for your
If you want to put your flavor on it, you can do that. But like it is cheese dust powder on top of a already established recipe. Like it is, and this is the thing that a lot of players, I think, mistake strong, powerful decks that they can play at a CEDH table. I'm not trying, and this is the thing, I really don't want to, I hope I'm not coming across as gatekeepy here.
I don't think you are.
I'm just trying to make sure that if you want to play CEDH, get a CEDH deck. And if you have a commander that's
proxy it, I will say. Right off the bat.
100%.
Make proxies of the deck. Don't cough out $5,000 or $10,000 on a deck you don't know you're not going to love.
There are also decks, CEDH decks that you can build pretty, I'm going to say budget, but you're going to scream at that. But like, for example, Joyra Cheerios is actually achievable to build under 300, I'd say. It's like
probably you're still going to want a few cards that'll push it closer to 1,000 to make it really fantastic. But you can build a solid CEDH deck for 300. I'd agree with that.
Yeah, and like you can do it. And like again, you'll need a mana crypt, but proxy it and just talk to your table about it. Our Welcome to CEDH event actually had an option for players to buy printed proxies from us before the event. So I'm really keen. We've printed them all out. They look awesome. They've been verified by our judge for gameplay.
Cool.
We're really keen for it. So August 6th, if you want to come down and get introduced to Welcome to CEDH, please come along because we are going to do a bit of a spiel, a bit of a conversation about what CEDH is. Then we're going to have the tournament bracket. And it'll be over before you know it.
See if James can get another turn 1 win.
Let's do it.
For sure.
But I completely agree in terms of bring those decks. And I'm going to actually make a product recommendation in terms of when you go to a game store, if you have the means to bring multiple decks, there is some incredible products out there that you can put decks in that kind of, you can almost line them up in power
Oh,
level.
like multiple decks. Yeah.
So my favorites at the moment are the Ultimate Guard, Archive, Super Hive, Treasure Hive, all that kind of stuff. I really like those. There's a bunch of other products on the market that you can have a look at, but if you're looking at bringing multiple decks, you can get like deck cases. Just thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm a huge fan of the, again, we're not sponsored by any of these companies, but the Ultimate Guard Archive, fits 4 boulders, Ultimate Guard boulders in there. And every single Commander night, I bring 4 Commander decks in those boulders, and I try to make sure that they're everywhere. And look, not everyone's going to be like that, but at the very least, I think if you have the means to play lots of Commander, have, a Precon, or close to a Precon, a synergistic deck, and a powerful deck.
Just so you can have good games and everyone else can. And let's throw this paper in.
Oh, hey, there it goes. All right. So
we're getting so much better at that.
We are indeed.
No one's getting hurt.
That we know of. Menacing.
That sounds like we're in some kind of void and throwing it outside and being like, I hope it doesn't kill someone.
Oh, my word. Well, look, we've been talking for a while now, so I just wanted to wrap it all up and just say, again, everyone who sits down to play Commander wants to have fun, including CDH players, including Precon players, and I think you would agree that the best games of Commander that we play are the ones that are really close, right?
Yeah,
where everyone's close to winning. So we want to end up with those games, and the best way that we can get to those games is by having those pre-game conversations where we work out where everyone's sitting. Yeah,
I 100% agree. I think that all the tips and tricks that we've said about how to have the conversation and how, like the last tip that we just gave about what you can bring to the store, if you just follow a little bit of this advice, tell us how it goes. Like, see if you can see the difference in your games.
Yeah, for sure. All right, that just about wraps up from us. So the question for the listeners, how does it go when you try to apply those techniques to describing your decks, like James was saying? And I also want to hear about any decks that are difficult to describe.
Oh, okay.
So, what do you think sits at a nebulous spot where, I think I'm going to throw it out there. Think it belongs to Ellie now, but the deck that Vi built.
Oh, such a
the
weird,
Jesus Pig. Yeah. So it's, it's like, is there a combo in that deck?
Yes.
Is it an infinite combo? Yes. Do I win the game on the spot?
Yes.
How many pieces does it require? 6?
19.
How many tutors are there? Like 20? How often does it happen? Not very.
So, you're describing it, it's like, okay, 6, 7, 9. Okay, this is big. 3?
Yeah. You got someone with a precon deck, putting on the table, taking out the table. I'll put it on the table. Oh, take it off the table.
You got someone standing there with a control combo list and elves just being like,
going cross-eyed.
I'm going to play both.
Well, also I just wanted to throw it out there as we're wrapping it up here that a reminder that the 10th episode of our podcast is the community Q&A.
It's next episode!
It's 2 episodes away.
2 episodes. Are we episode 9 or
it's episode 8, unfortunately. It's not the next one.
So
oh my god, James is that excited. He's skipping time.
I've got a list of questions from community members already. Thank you guys so much for sending them through.
Yeah, there's been some really good ones. Yeah.
It's really funny because Walt and I, believe it or not, hang out outside of this podcast.
Sometimes.
And it's just occasionally. It's really hard for me not to have conversations with Walt about these questions.
Yeah.
Because I want to save the conversation for the podcast.
I'm exactly the same. I've read some of these questions. I've gone, oh my god, I can't wait to talk to James about it. But yes, we're trying to wait. It's 2 episodes away. So if you have anything you'd like us to answer, seriously anything, obviously we're a Commander podcast, so mostly it should be Commander. But if you just want to know about what decks I have and what decks James has, and
how we organize our cards was one that I got that I'm really keen to talk about. Because I'm going to say New Year's Eve this year. Do you remember that? We'll talk about that.
Cool.
Awesome.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah. I mean, look, anything you would like to know about me or James or our decks or how we play Commander, tips for playing better games, seriously, throw them our way. So either comment on the SoundCloud, on the YouTube, or feel free if you are friends with us on Facebook, just message us directly.
Yep.
I've got a bit of a document going. I'm sure James is the same.
Yeah.
So anything that we don't get to in that Q&A, I'm going to go ahead and say it, is going to be its own episode. So if you have a question and then we don't answer it in that episode, it's because it's going to be its own episode.
It's so good. And I've already got some.
I've got like 4 or 5 that have already gone like, that's got to be an episode.
In other words, thank you guys for writing our podcast for us. We really appreciate all the hard work, and we'll take the reward and the fame.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, that's just about it. But James, it is tradition. Play of the week. Do you have one?
I have played so much Commander over the past fortnight.
Really?
And I'm so happy about it. My brain is tingling with different plays that could happen, but I'm actually going to give a shout out to a new community member. I don't want to do it by name because they are under 18 and I haven't got their consent for the podcast.
Sure.
But a new player came in. I'm going to say their age though, 14.
Wow.
14 years old, and came in with their dad. And by the way, their dad, old school Magic player, came in and was just, I could see that he was super keen. By the way, if you're listening to this podcast, because I did recommend it, hi, it's great that you're here. I'm glad that you guys stuck around. And I got to sit down with a brand new Commander player that had only ever played a bit of Arena, is what they said at the start.
Wow, so really new to the game.
Really, really new to the game. And granted, I actually want to give a shout out to another community member, Nick, who finished this game for me, because it ended up being a very long game with lots of explanations of rules, and I was quite busy running raffles and all this kind of stuff around night, and I unfortunately had to tap out and give Nick the play. But I just wanted to give this kid a shout out, because this is my play of the week. To be 14 years old, come into a game store. Also, like, 14's that kind of age where you're like, get off me, dad. I want to go, do that kind of stuff. This kid had such an incredible attitude to the game, was really open about the Rule Zero conversation. I also want to give a shout out to 2 of our other community members, Jacob Butters. Butters. I never call him Jacob. It caught me so off guard. I wanted to name it, but Butters and Ben were the other 2 opponents in that game.
Yep.
You guys did a fantastic job of, I know both of them listen to the podcast, so you guys did a fantastic job of introducing this Rule Zero conversation, talked about power levels, but the play of the game, and this is the thing, it was like a fortnight ago now, unfortunately, so it wasn't technically this week, but the play of the game was this 14-year-old kid reminding Ben, who is a very experienced Magic player, about a trigger in his upkeep that he missed.
Wow.
And it was just this beautiful moment, because it was one of these things, like it was a an upkeep trigger that had been going for a couple of turns and Ben was doing it all the time. I think it was, I can't remember if it was one of the things that you have to pay. Might have been a cumulative. I can't remember.
Maybe Mystic Remora or something.
I don't think it was Mystic Remora, because it was much lower powered, but like, I can't remember. It was an upkeep trigger that Ben was making a point of every single time. And this kid, Ben started making game actions, and this kid just went, oh, Ben, are you going to do this on your upkeep? And there was this beautiful moment where Ben went, I've taught you well, young Padawan. You have come to the table and now have the power. It was just a really beautiful moment. Honestly, like, my play of the week is like that moment specifically of someone reminding and keeping track. But the fact this kid is 14, super confident. But can I say as well, the dad, good job on, because you're an experienced Magic player, good job on not backseat Magic playing. Like, that was some seriously good parenting. It was, the whole interaction just warmed my heart. It was awesome.
That's great. I mean, look, we sort of market ourselves as being like, our community is for everyone. And naturally we tend to get a lot of new players. I think our podcast is great for new players as well. So if you like the podcast, please comment on the video, drop us a like,
subscribe, and ring the bell.
Do it though.
Please do it. We're really excited, and I will say it in this episode, we're really excited that after next episode, we are going to be working with a local game company to make this podcast more available. And when we say more available, Apple Music and Spotify. We're very excited to be branching out, and we'll talk more about the company we're working with when we lock in the details. But we're coming to Spotify, we're coming to Apple Podcast. Be patient, but I'm not sure if you can tell, Walt and I love doing this podcast, and we're getting all emotional. It's not even episode 10 yet. But if you have anything that you want to talk about or ask us, episode 10 is coming up a little slower than I wanted to, apparently. But please comment, talk to us. And again, I know a lot of you see us in store. A lot of the listeners out there see us personally. Put it on the YouTube, put it on the Facebook page when we put it up there. Comment on SoundCloud, because there are people out there in the community that want to hear this stuff and want to get connected, and I want to talk to them and hear their opinions. So the more we get this out there, the bigger our community grows, the more people we have, the more opinions we have, and the more people I can tell I've got a turn 1 win.
If I can just add one more thing, I would like to thank everyone who's been with us all the way since episode 1. We've had a few people who tuned in back then. They're still tuning in now. Yeah. So thank you. Like we seriously couldn't be... I mean, we're not very far yet, but we've got a lot further we'd like to go, and it's thanks to you guys. So really thank you for listening. And
so shout out to monthly list or weekly list like Stella correcting us on one episode, Ben for giving us some really good advice.
Ben dropped us a follow the other day. Really appreciate that, Ben.
There's some
Jordan's a really avid listener.
Nick Nick's just started driving and said that he hasn't even listened to music really yet in his car. It's just been us. So that's pretty cute. So yeah, all of you guys that are listening and subscribing and having conversations with us about it, you have no idea. This is kind of like a dream come true for Walt and I. Even though we're really small, we're both people that love creating content and love connecting with people. This is a way that we can do that. And the fact that we're going to be even bigger, we're going to be able to spread our wings a little bit more. Oh, this is awesome, right?
Yeah, it's going to be great. All right, thanks so much for being with us. And we're going to throw this piece of paper.
Oh my God, it was a 3-pager tonight.
Okay, both of those hit James. Yeah. So that came full circle on us.
I was too commenty about it. I kept saying we were doing such a good job, but that's it. Thank you very much, everyone.
Catch you in the next one.
Bye.
Bye.
Kaza.